So the next topic is cooking terms and presentation. The first point to make would be why we cook food. That would be to make it easier to digest, to improve texture, flavour, appearance, smell, make it safer to eat so it kills all the bacteria, and it can improve the longevity of the product so it makes it last longer. So what does cooking do to food? Let's first talk about protein. You've got animal protein and alternative proteins from plants. Animal protein needs to be broken down before our body can digest it, and alternative proteins need to be softened before our body digests it. So that's why we cook the protein. Fats need other foods like carbohydrates to help our body digest it. We can't digest fats on its own, so another reason for cooking. Starchy foods and carbohydrates such as potatoes and pastas and rice, they are indigestible in their raw state, which means we've got to cook them so that our bodies can digest them. In cooking, the heat breaks down the food and that improves the flavour, and it also lets out a smell, so that's when you can smell the food cooking. If, however, something is cooked for too long, it can actually destroy important vitamins and minerals that we need, so you need to keep the cooking time as short as possible. Next point is about heat exchange. You will know there are 3 different kinds of heat exchange. Conduction, which is heat passed directly from one source to another. So, for example, in stir fry, you've got the heat on the pan, the food touches the pan directly and it passes the heat through the objects. You then have convection. Convection is cooking in a liquid, so the heat is passed through the liquid to the food, such as boiling vegetables or simmering soups. Then you have radiation, which is a transfer using electromagnetic waves. So for example, in a microwave, they use radio waves, and these radio waves move around the particles in the food, so the fats, the sugars, they move them around, and then the friction within the food heats the food up from the inside outwards. Cooking methods. There are 3 main cooking methods. You've got cooking in water, cooking in oil, and cooking in an oven. Now in each of those 3 categories there are loads of different cooking methods that you need to know about. I'm not going to go through them all right now, it will take about an hour, but please revise those. You have them in your books, they're also on the revision guide on the VLE. You need to know the advantages and the disadvantages of each, and you need to be able to select a suitable cooking method for a particular food. Very briefly, I just want to touch on culinary terms. Again, I'm not going to go through them all. You know there's lots. We've been testing each other on them. You must know the culinary terms. They can come up specifically in questions, or they can just come up throughout the exam paper within questions. And if you don't know what they mean, you're going to struggle answering them. So please learn them and remember them. The next point is about presentation. And the whole point of presentation and the chefs working their magic is to make sure that food is as near perfect as it can be. For good presentation, there are lots of points you need to consider, and they include consistency, texture, appearance, flavouring, seasoning, colour, decoration and garnishes. Decoration, by the way, are for sweet products, garnishes are for savoury products, and you also need to think about accompaniments and what's going to be served with the main dish. Okay, so looking specifically at consistency, that means how thick a liquid is. So is it really thick and gloopy, or is it really thin and runny? That's the consistency. Now that's going to depend on the size of the pan that you're cooking it in, the amount of thickener that you're putting in, for example of flour, and the quality of the ingredients that you're using. And bear in mind it is much easier to thin a liquid than to thicken a liquid. Next is texture. So you all know what texture means. That's how the food feels in your mouth. Is it hard? Is it crunchy? Is it soft? Chewy? That's the texture. Now for chefs, tasting is essential to check the texture of the food. So you're not just tasting it to check out the flavour, you're tasting it for the texture as well. So for example, pasta. Chefs would taste the pasta and make sure it's al dente, which is firm to the bite. So it's cooked, but there's still a bit of a bite to it. It's still a little bit firm. The only way to do that is to try your food. Experienced chefs know the right amount of heat and the right amount of time to cook things. So for example, when you're cooking a steak and someone asks for it medium rare, they would know how long to cook that for on each side. Flavour and seasoning is essential to a good food product, to a good dish. Tasting again is very important. You need to be able to taste the food and make sure it's right. Good chefs know how to retain flavour in food, and they know how to adapt the food right at the last minute. What can they add to it? How can they change it? How can they make it better? So tasting is key to flavour and seasoning. To get the best flavour from your food, you need to use the best quality ingredients that you can get. You need to use fresh produce. You need to use as little cooking liquid as you can, so don't overdo the cooking liquid. Use any leftover liquids in things like soups and stocks, it just adds flavour to the rest of the food. Use appropriate cooking methods, which we've just discussed. Don't overdo the seasoning and don't overuse strong flavoured products. So you need to be very careful, there's a fine line, and you need to know how much that you can get away with using. And right at the very end, taste your food and adjust the seasoning if you need to. Add the salt and pepper. Last point on presentation is portion control, which we will cover in more detail in a later vlog, but I just wanted to mention it as part of presentation. You all know that if you overfill a plate or your food is spilling out of a bowl, that it doesn't look nice. So you need to make sure the portion control is right to achieve good presentation.